Welcome to the Live Courageously podcast show, episode 79. I'm your host, John Duffy, and Live Courageously has been the conscious theme of my life for the last three and a half years since the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, and the unconscious theme for most of my life. Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not the absence of fear. There's something contagious about someone who is courageous. So today's show is with a courageous friend, Adam Howk Jensen. Howk is a director, a producer, a dissident, and a versatile filmmaker with 20 years experience. He has expertise in projects, direction, production, film management, fundraising, development, production, and post-production. He's an award-winning journalist, a writer, producer, director, editor, teacher, artist, and global team project manager. He's dedicated to creating and crafting creative excellence in filmmaking. Two outstanding projects he has directed and produced documentary films with the Victims of Communism Project, the Witness Project, and his ongoing work directing and producing the Follow the Science documentary series with the Sound Mind Creative Group. In the words of the narrator, the Follow the Science, Clifford Duncan, something broke in 2020. We haven't been right since. Many want to move on from COVID. They want grace and amnesty, but too many lives were destroyed. Too much damage was inflicted. Too many questions remain. We can't move on. It's time we explore what really happened. And for the past 3 years, an incredible team of independent filmmakers have been working on a gut-wrenching docuseries chronicling what unfolded in 2020 and its impact on people around the world. So with that, let's welcome and greet Howk to the stage. Greetings, Howk. How are you doing, man? Thank you for joining me on Live Courageously.
I'm great. Thanks, John. Thanks for that amazing introduction. I've had an eclectic career path and it goes all over the place. So thanks for that amazing summation. I always just try and say it simply with I'm just trying to be a vertically integrated creator who can do a little bit of it, can do it all to pull things off as best I can.
Well, you do have a very eclectic background, and you've done so many different kinds of things. And, two of the things I always like opening up the show with is, one, I asked my guests, and most of the people who've been on my show have been people that I know personally in the real world, not just in the social media world. So I asked the first question is, how did we meet? And then, we start the conversation from there. So I don't know if you remember the first time we met.
Sure. Yeah. I believe the first time we met, you came to a screening of one of my Witness Project episodes. I had an associate producer, fellow named Phil Hancock, I believe you and he
Yes.
had befriended through some social engagements in Hollywood and invited you. And we didn't know anything about each other, but I had made this whole series, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I believe we watched 3 episodes, one about Cambodia, China, and Cuba, I think. And it was all about the world of authoritarian regimes, collectivist regimes, communist regimes, and the dissidents that emerged from that. And you spoke, and we'll get into it, but then you stood up and spoke and started sharing your story. So we had an amazing crossover on that theme. But that's where we first met.
Exactly. And it was excellent because I had not known about the victims of communism in that particular series. And the documentaries that you did were pretty amazing. The one I watched that night, and I know I'm going to throw up something. You also won some awards at the Anthem Film Festival for some of your documentary work on that particular Witness Project. So that's just a picture I just threw up of that.
Yeah. So it was the Witness Project was the name of the series. It was paid for, produced by, there's a group out of DC called it's the catchy name of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, kind of VOC for short. And VOC approached me saying, we have these stories. Would you believe it? Hollywood was not making stories critical or diving deep into the excesses of tyrannical communist regimes of old during the Cold War and currently. And I thought, as a guy who likes to push back against the norm and swim upstream, I'll take this on. And I made, I would like to say, works of art out of these very difficult stories about what it is to speak up as a dissident in a closed society. Like, closed society is a nicer way of saying, authoritarian regimes, that you're jackbooted authoritarian regimes. And that's true of any group, not necessarily the extreme left ideology. I'm against all of those, and call them all out traditionally, but it's riskier to do so on the left when you work in the Hollywood system.
Absolutely. Here's just a picture of the Witness Project documentary, and this is one about from Cuba escaping communism, and also another one just to give people an example.
Yeah, and those are actually I've done my time. They've started producing other ones. I produced them from I think 2015 to 2021. So and so I did 9 total, and now they're continuing their series. But yeah, if you go to like Howk Jensen, you can see them all the ones I produced there. Howk
Well,
Jensen.
let's spend a little bit time here because what you said, on being a dissident and taking it on yourself, that's who you are. Taking this on, is kind of risky, but we all know too. Not only Hollywood doesn't, but the educational system doesn't have any education on the dissidents or what it was like to grow up under communist regimes, whether they're East Europe, Asia, Latin America, anywhere that's been the left or authoritarianism. There's no education about that. There's no expose of that. It's almost like it's put away as if it disappeared and
Mm,
never existed and it wasn't
mm.
part of history. So yeah, what did you learn from it and going through it, and then also what did you want to bring out to share with people who are uneducated, whether it's in
Yeah,
school
well,
or in Hollywood, who don't even know that this is what the world existed? It's almost like they forgot that this was a reality.
well, I was raised. I'll back up a little bit and say I'm a kind of an American mutt, born in Virginia, spent significant times in Philly, Minneapolis, Nashville, New Hampshire, college in Colorado, and then a life in California. So I went to several junior highs, several high schools, different stuff, and I got to have that unique compare and contrast of what you learned in different areas and different types of schools, public versus private. And I'm old enough where the Cold War was still on and ended when I was in high school. And as part of that education, I got to travel to East Germany in high school. I went to West Germany and then traveled to East Germany. And then I went in college. I was there shortly after the wall came down and got to travel all over Eastern Europe in '95.
Wow.
Walked the battle lines, if you will, and saw the gray, depressed places that were the former Soviet blocks. And I just happenstance had that education of what the Soviet Union was, and I also was a student of history and understood that okay, so putting it very simply, extreme right was sort of the Hitler Nazi paradigm where you don't want to go that way, and then extreme left was sort of the communist paradigm, and horrible things happened there. And didn't want to go that way, and that's how I understood it. And then I went out to California, and that whole half of that education of things you don't want to do in terms of not repeating history was missing. I just thought that was strange. Just a big gap in the historical record. And then Hollywood fancies itself. I mean, used to. I mean, they still try to, but I think their time has passed. But like they really fancied themselves the arbiter of history, and they sort of deemed what happened. So the opportunity took this on, I realized I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be tough because it's like I had realized that film. Excuse my little horse. I had realized that film is incredibly powerful, and that it was basically wasted on entertainment and advertising. All the best dollars, all the highest dollars go straight to advertising, straight to entertainment. And I was like, this film medium is incredibly powerful stuff. You really are living a faux experience of somebody else when you do this. You visually experience it, you auditorily experience it, and intellectually know it's not real. But I think our spiritual self, our emotional self, doesn't know it's not real to a certain degree. And I'm speaking sort of in gross terms here, but I do think I mean, the fact that Star Wars is in fact a religion to some people gives you a sense of how powerful it is. And I realized that was needed, that this style of that strong filmmaking, strong cinematic filmmaking, where you really feel that you're experiencing it, experiencing these characters, was important. And when I was asked by VOC to make the Witness Project, I was like, all right, well, I can't go halvesies. I have to go all in. And honestly, that's what I realized. To answer your sort of second part of the question, what I learned, I get into it. I'm like, all right, so these are the freedom fighters things, like they're people who stood up. Like, okay, well, but what does that mean really? And what is it? And what were the excesses of the utopian ideal? There's this sort of Marxist socialist, you know, Stalin Leninist Maoist presentation of what communism, socialism is, and there's this whole thing of the Cold War, which again I grew up with. I really looked at it, but I didn't really understand it really. And so I spent a lot of time going, oh, these are individuals who had either been born into or had it foisted upon them by a type of takeover in which suddenly their sense of individualism was a threat to the existence of this very, very insecure, giant juggernaut thing called the state. And it's just, it's this weird concept. But and I remember thinking, like, just this one person thinking for themselves is a threat to this huge apparatus called the state. And I really kind of I started to dig into that. I really spent some time and I thought about what these people are going through. And I would sit down with them, and then and then I get them on camera, and it's like a weird. I mean, it's a little provocative to say, but you're almost like a confessor because you have this camera over your shoulder, and then you get which sort of gives you the right to ask questions that you're never going to ask. You should never really ask anyone. I mean, I'd apologize ahead of time, like, because these people were tortured. These people had, I mean, real, actual physical torture, as well as other horrible manipulative techniques foisted upon them. And I was going to ask them about them. Not necessarily all that made it into the final cut, but I would ask them, like, so what were they trying to destroy inside of your spirit? Where does your individualism live inside of you in such a way that you could see that they were trying to destroy it? Because they really do believe that the individual is a threat to them. And so all their techniques of control are designed to make that a type of spirit enslavement. And I never, these were not terms I would have used before. But it's like it became evident that's what was going on. And so I spent time with, like, this Nal Om. This is a Cambodian story. He was a doctor who escaped the Khmer Rouge after 2 years in the internment camps there, and narrowly survived the killing fields. And he would just talk about. I was like, where did you hide your identity? And he's like, oh yeah, I had to take on this completely different persona in which I basically had to pretend I was an automaton robot that would do any order, however ridiculous. And if you hesitated, that gave the bad guys a sense that you may be thinking for yourself, and you had to be exterminated. And I'll just add one last thought to that. But the administrators, the bureaucrats, knew that he was a doctor, and when they got sick, they would quietly say, "Well, you're a doctor, right?" And then, so he had this whole, they knew that a real doctor is what they needed when they were sick, not these automaton robots who they were destroying. So it was just very bizarre kind of journey into the inner realm of spirituality, of what it is to be an individual versus this entity called the state. Does that make sense?
There's so much, so much in there to unpack, and we will, because some of the things you're talking about, like how they tried to destroy individualism and why individualism scared them, obviously kind of fits into your later stuff with the COVID series, right?
Sure.
And also the techniques that the communists use to destroy individualism and destroy free thinking, and how those have reappeared in our world today. So there's a lot to unpack with that. And then for you, you were, like you mentioned earlier, when I came and I saw your screening, and I got up and mentioned some of my background, I look at it, I was a Stalinist, Maoist,
Right.
a high school dropout at 26 who led a trip to communist Yugoslavia and communist China, a true believer, thinking that this was a utopia. It was, a beautiful place that was going to make the world better for all of the poor and average people like myself that needed a better world. And then, of course, little by little over time, and Cambodia was a big part of it, understanding the Pol Pot regime's massacre of their people, little things started to open my eyes and make me realize, oh, wait, this isn't a utopia. And then I go further and it's like, and then it was like, oh, crap, this is a real nightmare, a dictatorship, and a horrible reality that's been created by these regimes. But it took me a while to get there.
Yeah, fascinating.
Your films are important. And then, of course, Hollywood, which, Hollywood's perception of and the way to promote communism has been the Red Scare. That's how they always promote it. And, outside of that, Hitler bad, yes, communism good. And they still have that belief, and that's the same thing in the educational system, that one side, it was bad, but the other side was great, and it was a utopia. And a lot of them still believe that communism is a utopia, even though it's really just the other side of the Nazism and communism, both the same thing from two different sides.
Well, and that same group always rolls out the trope of like, well, it hasn't been done right before, and it's like and I always think that's such a cop out because it's like, well, let's see, it's an infinitely corruptible system that basically a bunch of a-holes come along and are basically thugs and utilize it to create sort of a volunteer slave force that becomes the backbone of the state by which they kind of rule by decree on top. Eventually someday everyone gets the rule. It'll dissolve in the leadership and it becomes one giant kumbaya communist, like commune on the face of the planet. But it's early. But you look at the people who are putting it through it now, and it's like, well, where's the proof you weren't the latest a-hole? Because these people are always using every underhanded, undermined thing to subvert the systems that they don't like. And it's like, well, where's the onus is on this group, this progressive group, to show that, oh, here's where we went wrong, and here's how we're going to do it differently. No, we must ignore all that because anything that says anything ill of the state is wrong and evil because we're hugely insecure individuals. I mean, I want to believe that we have an ability as free people to associate and collaborate and make it a better world for ourselves. In fact, I think we've been doing that for the last several decades. And then the sort of circa 2015, I mean, it's been festering long before that, but it's really been gone in the full overgear where like people are finally realized like there's some sort of communication and ideological struggle going on within our own borders, and everyone just wasn't aware, was kind of blissfully ignorant of it. But it's, yeah, the limousine liberals of Hollywood have always driven me a little bit crazy, just to summarize it.
When I came to Hollywood, I was on that side politically, and little did I know that I would come to Hollywood to get to the other side. So,
yeah. Well, and these are all my friends too. Like, I mean, I have a lot of friends who, I think technically I could be called a liberal from the 90s in a way. I mean, where it was like, oh, we're like little L liberal, and because it just was like, all right, well, we're going to try and find a way forward. But the way that there's this sort of communication expertise from the left to usurp any progress, they get all the credit. Anything wrong in the world, you blame everybody else. And I think for me, it's like self-responsibility and taking responsibility for your own actions is so key to the individual experience. And there's no place for that in these leftist views. And it's incongruous.
You know what? You go back and I look at it and I don't have intellectually I have one answer, but I really don't fully understand it. You look back when I was in the '60s, part of being a dissident, part of being a leftist was question authority. That was the quote.
Right.
Question authority, and that was we
freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, question authority, help the needy.
The free speech movement, all those things. That's what we live by, and somehow people from our political point of view in our generation flip to don't question authority, don't have free speech. And it was like, how did that flip happen? How was that flip manipulated, or why did it happen? But it obviously flipped totally to this opposite. And now the people who came from that political point of view don't want free speech and don't want to question any authority whatsoever.
Well, it's fear. It's the old tool of the authoritarian regimes. And I can broaden this out where it doesn't even have to be the left-right paradigm. There are just always, a free society, and what we're in now is only about 30 years old. Like the natural state has been basically a monarchy, a tyranny, some sort of controlling force above us. I think the communist persuasions, the Marxist persuasions have just the latest iteration of exploiters of that. But
true.
Fear has always been the key. That's to further answer your question about what I learned, where there's always an initial violent phase to make everyone fear, or at least traditionally there's a violent phase, but there was a type of violence or a type of intimidation, which might be a better word for it, that everyone's like, oh my God, I don't want that to happen to me. And once that they've cultivated that fear, and you can see that in things like the recent pandemic. Before that, it was cancel culture. Just there's been this sort of attempt to think, if you speak up, if you say something, negative things might happen to you. Your ability to work, earn, put food on the table, your reputation, and it's a powerful drug. I mean, it's a methodology in which it's a force multiplier, where these tyrannies, they don't have the manpower to literally go, everyone literally fears a jackbooted thug coming to their door and saying, you said something wrong and we're taking you to jail. That's logistically impossible. But the fear of that happening is huge. So you just these regimes are usually small with a couple violent, enforcers, and then they manage that fear to keep this much larger population that could crush them overnight, really, if they got organized, at bay. And I feel like I've been first watching this for 20 years and thinking, gosh, this is really getting into our own society and is permeating. But nobody wanted to believe we were in a battle. We were in this ideological struggle. We were in this civil Cold War. And I've seen people struggling to define it the last few years. But the pandemic happened, and when that occurred, I was like, oh, I'm not worried about any viral issue, to be perfectly honest. Like this is a trumped up, um, so to speak, issue being used to cultivate fear, to change society for a greater vision somewhere in some committee room somewhere. I could just feel it from the get go. And so I've always operated that there was a fear exercise, and you could just see it as a repetition of this historical repetition of a state trying to control a population to benefit its own existence.
And when you started to feel that, I mean, you were there wasn't in the beginning. There wasn't a lot of people who responded that way because the fear worked. The fear through the media, the fear through all the educational institutions, through everything, started to spread, and everybody. And I remember myself. That's why I started Live Courageously. I was doing a movie up in Canada with Kevin Sorbo, and I woke up in the morning and I went, I saw friends of mine who were brave people. All of a sudden, were hiding and not coming out of their houses because they were scared of the virus. And I was like, how do people go from being brave to cowards overnight? How did they do that to them? And I was like, I know too many brave people, and I need to start something to promote the message of live courageously and not live with fear, because I wasn't afraid of it. And I was like, is it real? Yeah. Could I get sick? Yeah. And I'll deal with it, but I'm not going to give up my life because I'm being told to. I just won't do it. So you did the same thing. What was it for you? Because you weren't. It wasn't like you were part of a giant group that said, "Oh yeah, we're not going to go along with this." You were standing out from the crowd and from the masses of people who were following.
I would say my version of I had to accept that fear was going to be permeating society at all levels, and that there might be some runs on food supply. I was an early prepper where I was like, I'm gonna make sure we just have enough food for like 36 months. I was living in California, had family members out there, and I was like, all right, I have to treat this as a serious thing because panic could set in, and something um, was that something could go amiss with the society at large. But for me, it was the final straw where I had cultivated a life in California and career in Hollywood where I could bug out in 30 days if I wanted to, basically. And once I was like, okay, this initial, thrust has passed. There's the panic isn't, toilet paper is back on the shelves. I mean, I knew all that stuff was just sort of hoopla, but it was time for me to leave. So I actually got out of town. I was like, it's time for me to exit California and get a life going elsewhere. Cause it's like, I'd spent 15, 20 years trying to wake people up to the fear. And like, I would tell people and I could just see them. They just think they kind of see it as like this conspiracy theorist term or whatever. And I was like, I've already done years of trying to prepare people for this and awaken them to it. I need to get out of Cal, and I couldn't do business very well in California. That AB5 back in the day, where like independent contracting became difficult. And I thought, you know what, if the state's going to crush the individual, I'm going to get somewhere where I'm more comfortable first. I'm going to look out for myself for a moment because I'd put myself out there for so long trying to tell the story. So I left California and traveled and was determined as such in terms of was to keep travel a thing. I got a travel trailer and traveled the whole time during lockdowns, or like not the whole time, but like once I was out, I was traveling during lockdowns. I was talking to people. I was like, where can I camp? Like they'd let me camp on the margins. They do this. I was like, look, I'm gonna not self-induce myself to be in a prison of my own making. And I mean, not that I had like a deep stand. I just knew this was important, that the freedom of movement is a big part of our freedoms. And I just wanted to be out and moving. Where I was going, I wasn't even sure. I was sort of in okay, I'm leaving California now. What phase? But so I'm rambling a little bit just to say that I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I just knew it was time for me to move along and start somewhere new. And during that time, I got a phone call from an associate a producer, colleague friend of mine saying, "Hey, my spidey sense, my artistic sense is telling me that this lockdown thing is perhaps a little overwrought and maybe we should, as storytellers, we should do something about it, and we'd appreciate if you would helm it as a director." And it was one of those, like, here I thought I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a break from filmmaking, and I'm like, oh man, like, I'm a lifelong dissident and filmmaker. And I didn't even used to call myself a dissident. It's just I decided to do that to help other people feel comfortable doing so. But I'm a supporter of dissidents. I hold their stories, I put it out there. And what is it to be a dissident? And I was like, I'm going to speak out against it. But I wanted to do so with a high quality cinematic television show that's repeatable, watchable, fresh, and has legs and could possibly, be a moneymaker in the old world style. Because I didn't want to make a one-off documentary, but that was the inception of the Follow the Science, the series.
And that's right up here.
Yeah.
Follow the Science, and we'll talk. That we start here, and we'll go further into this one.
Sure. Yeah. So and I mean and part of it too is like remembering at the time. This is 2021, March 2021. So it's been 1 year. Lockdowns had just started to be eased off. Is before the vaccines, but it was like, well, maybe we're in between. I think it was like, I don't know, after it's before Omicron, but it was like it was a specific moment where the initial thrust of like people were like, oh, okay, it was supposed to be 2 weeks, and here we are 9 months into it. And I left in basically, I think, January 6th of 2021. But I get this phone call in March 2021, and everyone was very terrified to speak up. There was a real sense that cancel culture was strong. That if you said anything, people they would dig into your past. They would start looking for your career, looking for people to call. Like, do you realize that so and so is questioning the authority? I mean, it was just kind of this weird communication war, thuggery, and then and the people I followed were experiencing it. And so like getting people to work on something like this, they were nervous. So first thing we did was we actually sat down for a few months to think it through and created the Sound Mind Creative Group, which is an anonymous group of filmmakers. That allowed people to work on the film anonymously, without fear of retribution from the mainstream news or Hollywood industry. Because these people have clients in the mainstream. They're all mainstream filmmakers. And I initially was part of that in anonymity, and we started a fundraising project, and we did very well. We organized ourselves, raised $300,000 in our first push, and I was like, all right, we've got a real project here, and here's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be living on the road and making this film, at least initially, and then at a certain point, it settled in that the project needed a voice. Someone needed to come forward. I'm the director. My job to be out front. So I decided to, be public about it and let everyone know I was working on it. And so that's been, yeah, there's me. But we were early. I mean, the kind of thing, like we were like everybody was on their heels. They didn't know what to do. And we were one of the only projects out there talking. So we started interviewing people. Like basically we got raised that funds, and I was like, we need to have a script. I want to make something that's watchable, repeatable, entertaining, because I want kids to be able to watch this, young people to think, oh, that is interesting, I want to watch it again. I didn't want to make a one-off talking head documentary that's good for a moment for the chattering masses of the news cycle, but no one's really going to watch it. Certainly not going to watch it again 5 to 10 years from now. I want to make something that's watchable 20 years from now, 100 years from now. And so we started into the script process, but we also, as soon as anyone said yes to an interview, I'd jump on a plane or jump in a car and zip out and film them. And you became part of that process. That's where you entered the story when we started to want to film in Los Angeles. I'll come back to that in 2 seconds, but it was, we also were doing video broadcasts. I would interview anyone who we couldn't get to on the video. And I talked to everyone. I talked to Robert Malone. I talked to Peter McCullough. I talked to Jay Bhattacharya. Nick Hudson, he's a dissident out of South Africa. Matthias Desmond of Belgium, who was talking about the mass formation, and then we went to a couple places and started interviewing like Naomi Wolf and Zuby, kind of like various types of pundits and podcasters. Um, and I kind of roll in the freedom movement. I mean, I did start caucusing with the libertarians because they're the ones paying for films about freedom of speech 15 years ago. So I've been caucusing with that group for a while. I mean, I'm a small L libertarian meets liberal meets little C conservative. I mean, I'm a not to be painted with one brush kind of guy, but I find the freedom movement to be they've been fighting the whole time, so they get a lot of cred for that. And um, so it was fascinating to be talking to these top minds who they themselves were shell shocked. These were not people who were looking to become social people, like social media figures. These were doctors, scientists who were living quiet lives, and suddenly they themselves were feeling this need to speak up, a sort of a truth to power thing. And I would get on the phone with them like, oh, hey, welcome. There's this little thing called the journey, like the hero's journey, the journey of the dissident. You seem to be waking up to this process and have this insatiable need to speak up. Let's walk through your internal process. How you feeling? And they're, like, I asked that question like Robert Malone, and he's like, oh yeah, this is crazy. I just started talking about it, and then like, so, I'm being attacked from all these different directions, and you think about that. Fast forward to now, 2000, here we're June 2024, and now all these characters are major. They've all gone on to like become major fixtures of major movements of resistance, and are sort of cottage industries unto themselves, and are now, running conferences, and they're putting out political endorsements. But I got a chance because we were so early to market, or early to the process of it. We talked to everyone. And I was just like, let's get this disorganized group of dissidents moving forward together as best we can. Because I knew it would eventually, there's always infighting, all that kind of stuff. But at that time, everyone was like, what happened and what are we doing about it? And it was a fascinating time to talk to all these people.
Well, I remember when Sound Media, and I knew folks in that who reached out to me and, told me that you were involved and you were doing this project called Follow the Science. And I was like, yes, this is freaking great, because it was like, and then they asked me if I would be involved. And I'm like, 100%, of course, this is fantastic, because nobody was doing it. Nobody was standing up. And beyond just the standing up and being courageous and being willing to go out there and bring this message, it was also your vision, which I like, because, and you talked a little bit about it just before, but it was creative. It was a way to reach the young people. It wasn't just a boring conversation among pundits who were just going to run their mouth by, on any TV network or, cable network, but it was something to kind of get them to think, to make people think and challenge them to think, not all agree, not have to agree with one particular perspective, but not be afraid to question authority, question everything, and think again. And so that's kind of what you were doing, and you were doing it in an entertaining and creative way. And one of the funny things for me, I'm going to throw up a quick picture, was besides me line producing, got me in there as an extra, as a doctor doing a dance. So I was like,
yeah, I had you doing everything. I was like, we need a doctor. John, you're up.
Dr. Duffy appeared.
We need a dancing Dr. Duffy. Yeah.
Dancing Dr. Duffy. Who would ever thought that was going to happen? But what was so much fun, I mean, I got to meet Clifford Duncan and get to know him. I got to, meet Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. What a brilliant guy. And just, to be able to meet these incredible people, and then go when you did the screening down in Florida and just meet some of the amazing people who are involved in the project.
Well, let me jump in there about Clifton Duncan. So Clifton Duncan is the host of the series. He's our lead character of the series. And he started doing podcasts because he likes to joke about how he's more famous for not acting than he is for acting. But he's a accomplished Broadway actor, singer, opera. I think he's even got operatic stylings, and was rising through the ranks. He was about ready to kind of step into sort of leading man roles and really making a name for himself. And I think he was doing very, very well. And he himself, he's a self-described. He was all in as a COVIDian in terms of like, oh God, like he read early. He's like, okay, I'm going to wear gloves and a mask, and everyone else is going to die but me, kind of thing, because no one's taking this seriously yet, like in the early days. But after 3 or 4 months into lockdowns, he was, I don't know if I've talked too much about it, but I call it, the hero's journey. I talk about the journey of the dissident, where it's like, you start to like, well, wait, we're being told this, but what I see on the everyday in the streets isn't adding up. And he was strong enough to listen to his own conscious, if you will, or your artistic spidey sense, and thought this does not make sense, and it's clearly killing the arts community of New York. It's clearly killing the entity, the draw, the thing that makes New York was clearly hurting. And he's like, this doesn't seem to be worth it. And then fast forward, he started questioning it, kind of got canceled out of the world, and then he started refusing. And then when the vaccines came along, he refused them. So he was persona non grata in the old Broadway scene. And so he started speaking out about it on various podcasts. Tom Woods was a podcaster that was important to getting his word out and actually kind of inspiring this project. He said, what we need is a film about this thing. And that was part of the impetus of us getting started. He was one of our early angel funders. But we got really lucky. We heard him on Tom Woods, and we reached out to him. He'd left New York. He was in Atlanta waiting tables. And we said, hey, we've got a little bit of a budget. We could offer you, a bit of money for a bit of a role if you'd like to come out. And I was like, but I want good quality stuff here, and all of my connections were in LA. So like, let's do it. Let's do it in LA. And that's when we approached you to be the line producer for the entire LA shoot, the entire LA unit. And wasn't that a thing? Because that was right in the height of, what did they call them? They were like the COVID enforcers, the COVID protocol.
Yeah, you had basically the COVID police.
COVID police, like
on every movie set.
Yeah.
This, and you had people who were formerly production assistants or whatever, and all of us accountants, and now all of a sudden they were scientists and doctors.
Yeah, they were given the job. Yeah, they were at the entrance of the set. They had the right to ask you to test you, and you had to have a proof of a test or whatever, test negative, and they could refuse you. And it was almost a case study. Like here, like you said, it was anybody they hired initially, and then within a few weeks or months, they're like, "Oh, this is a great job, and I have all this power, and like we should unionize, and we should like be able to control everything." Like you could see them just
forever.
Yeah, forever. You could just see like a localized tyranny emerging from this thing. And so we had to have this sort of underground shoot in LA. Remember, we had to run around and like we had to have all these cover stories, like we didn't say anything. We just didn't tell any of the crew, because there were people, there were independents and union workers, but we had a decent enough wage. People were willing to work on it. Sure. And then we had some tests in the corner, and we had the paperwork in the corner. We had no one manning it. And if anyone wanted to walk up and take a look, they were welcome to. I believe one crew member walked up. It's like, oh, shouldn't I be taking a test? Like, sure. And I like, here's the test. And then they kind of walked. It's like, do I have to take this test? Like, no, not if you don't want to. I'm like, oh, okay. But it was a weird underground feeling to it all, because we could have been shut down by the studios or the unions if they knew we were working there. So it was wild. It felt like a piece of history happening.
Well, it was even one of the people you interviewed for the series is a woman who ran a restaurant up in Van Nuys, Pineapple Bar and Grill, and you interviewed her as part of the series. We went over to her place, and she experienced being shut down by the governor and his police because she could not allow people to eat outdoors at her restaurant. But right across from her, the movie industry has
right. The special dispensation, 150 Hollywood production crew can eat safely in a parking lot, but not the local restaurateur.
The local restaurant, because that wasn't safe. And everything about it. I was like, I made movies all throughout the whole time, and I had to deal with the rules, but I always found a way to minimize, limit them, break them, because I was like, at the end of the day, we're on set, everybody's wearing the mask. And then they go out to dinner together, and they all hang out at night without the mask. And you're going, so you don't get COVID when you're hanging out together later, but you just get it on the set, right? And you believe that. You don't question any reality. You just assume that if somebody tells you, you just believe it.
And we had made a lot of educated guesses about what was BS about it all. And it was tough because, of course, there are those like, oh my God, this risk you're taking, you're being like, these are all horrible things. It was designed to make it seem as if we were the reckless ones. We conducted everything very professionally, up to normal standards, up to normal health standards. Correct. We just, and for anyone who needed some comfort or space, they got comfort in space. But I mean, here we are in 2024, and a lot of those educated guesses turned out to be pretty spot on about 6 feet being basically a made up number, masks being known to be a noble lie, which we get into in the series. Like we knew we could just we could tell it was BS, and we refused to succumb to it. We did this. We refused to allow our critical thinking and our professional understanding of how to run a safe set, to tell a good story about authority being overplayed on a population, including ourselves, real time,
Real time.
it was fascinating. It
It
was,
was. It was a great experience. I have to say,
yeah,
working with you and working with the team, we had a great time. We had a blast, and I wanted to show the audience
sure,
a trailer from it and from your website. So let me go there real quick
sure.
and see if I can get that up and share the screen. And here we go. I'm gonna get this up and share this trailer from your thing. And tell me if I think we got it right now, right?
Yeah, I think this is this little director's message fundraiser trailer. Yeah. Hi there. My name's Hawk Jensen, and I'm the director of Follow the Science Lockdowns Go Viral, which is the first installment of a multi-part documentary series. Episode 1 is on the effects of the COVID-19 lockdowns and mandates during 2020. Follow the Science champions resilience and aims to expose the truths around the government's invasive agenda. And this series aims to change the culture that surrounded lockdowns and mandates as we experienced them during 2020. In order to get episode 1, Lockdowns Go Viral, finalized and out into the world, we need your help with donations. You can learn more and donate at followthescienceseries.com. That's followthescienceseries.com. What happened during the COVID lockdowns was a complete disaster and ruined the lives of millions of Americans. The mainstream media and big tech outcasted anyone who was trying to speak up or dared question the government's true motives. In order to never let mandates and lockdowns happen ever again, donations like yours will go directly towards supporting Follow the Science, which means it will go directly towards exposing the corrupt media and government. The Follow the Science series relies on grassroots donations because Follow the Science is a series that Hollywood doesn't want you to see. Without your support, lockdowns and mandates will happen again. Please go to followthescienceseries.com and donate today. That's followthescienceseries.com and donate today. Thank you so very much. I hope you enjoy the show.
I have this vision, like a wave of deaths moving across the globe. We should take a closer look at these lockdown policies. The collateral damage was almost worse than the pandemic.
Virus go to virus.
Join us as we lock down the science on lockdowns.
It's a very, very cool trailer. And yes, you can go to donate to be able to watch it. You can do it at where is it?
Followthescienceseries.com.
Followthescienceseries.com. Followthescienceseries.com, right up on the screen right now. So you can go there. So tell us, I mean, obviously you took it and now it's in a 5-part series. That's part 1. They can go and donate $20 there to be able to watch the first
chapter
episode.
1. Yeah.
Chapter 1. And it's it's I understand there's people that don't want you to see it. I'm not sure I want people to see it, my dancing, but outside of that,
we had a great choreography dance lesson in the moment. We found the beat, and you stuck to it, and you did a great job.
Hawk became a dance choreographer to the stars that day. but the series is so on every level. It's entertaining, and that's the big thing about it. I think that's even special. It's entertaining. It's challenging. It's thought-provoking. It offers a whole range of different people's points of view and experience. And it just, if nothing else, it forces you to think for yourself, to understand further, to go deeper. And tell us more, and then we're going to talk about how do we deal with this going forward,
Okay.
because doesn't mean that this is over. And, you say it, and I think Duncan... Clifford Duncan on his X channel, which is an excellent channel, by the way. He's always posting some amazing stuff. I always watch him. And he kind of raises, people want to kind of put it in the past and make believe it didn't exist and that they didn't do what they did
Yeah,
to
yeah,
everybody, and that's not acceptable. So
right.
tell us all about that and your point of view
Well,
about that.
well, it's funny to watch that director's message. I mean, of course, like everyone, I dislike watching myself, but like I remember, like we made that a while back, and it was the point of the series is to actually try to win over the fence sitters. It's not we're trying. It's not we made the presumption that you know red meat pandemic lockdown critics are going to enjoy it. But we knew that there was a whole lot of what I would say traditionally liberal folks who, and libertarian folks and conservative folks who kind of bought into the fear of the pandemic, the undue fear of the pandemic that caused them to unfortunately minimize their own protecting their own rights. And so we wanted to make something very easy, or not like I'm thinking easy listening. I'm thinking like we wanted to try and recruit people or win people over who questioned internally but were too scared to say it out loud, too scared to express it. And so that's why, I mean, even with that little director's message, we were very like, hey, maybe you think about this, maybe this was we've been doing this for a while where like I really have been walking on eggshells for a long, long time about this because I wanted to try and bring a coalition of different people who think differently and people who might self-identify, um, but with this old term of liberal that they no longer feel necessarily applies to them, or they want to hold on to the word, but the actual movement has turned into this other thing. And we wanted to say, hey, well, it's okay to question. We wanted, like you said, the original sort of attributes of liberalism was to question authority and freedom of speech and comfort the uncomfortable. And I've been walking on eggshells for a long time, and I'm actually really enjoying that everything's coming out. And now I can finally speak very plainly. Like, yeah, there was a lot of BS being peddled, and everybody about from our supposed leaders, and to question it was an invitation to have everything about your being, existence, and individualism questioned, which is wrong. That is oppression. That is intimidation, and I just won't abide by that. And I will support anyone who will stand up to that. And even just like the dissident movements, if you look historically, there's always a moment where they do well, and then there's the infighting starts. And even during that, I was like, hey, we're at that crate. Everyone's sort of now fighting over who was the most right and all this kind of stuff. Everyone, as long as there's all these different groups kind of moving somewhat in the same direction to try and stop that pendulum of history from smacking us all out of our own existence, yay. There are critiques and there's debates to hone and sharpen everybody, but it was interesting to watch that happen. But now that it's becoming, you have Fauci doing the circuit right now to all the sycophantic mainstream media saying, well, we just didn't know. And it's like, yes, we did. There were those trying to speak up, and those were squelched. The science was unclear. There was very clear science on how to act, and all that was shoved out of the side. And the master obfuscator known as Dr. Fauci. Now, there's lots of other people to critique, but I think it's good to really focus on him and his cult of followers, where he could just sort of he would just pick little, like, oh, he could say, well, there's a science over here, there's a report, a study that was done in some obscure country, and that points that maybe we should do this. And then some study would come from some other area, probably not under his influence, probably not being paid for from his huge sums of money that he controlled under the NIH of infectious disease, whatever that full acronym is. Like that whole aspect of questionable science, deep corrupted science. And if something came along that question is like, oh, well, that's not necessarily repeatable. He could obfuscate with all this technical babble, all this scientific babble. And I'm tired. I was sick of it during it, but now everyone's seeing it, other than those who were duped by it, because they know the power of being duped is very hard to admit to. And I think Fauci should go down as one of the greatest, biggest disgraced public servants of all time. He's currently, he was the most highest paid bureaucrat in the history of the United States, which gives you a sense of how BS his position was and how how much he ran this weird bureaucratic fiefdom within the government. I think that whole thing needs to be dismantled. I'm going to rant here for a minute about that, but I'm because I think there's real science to be had, and I think the system has gotten so off the rails that it's not real science. It's not serving the best interests of humanity. It's not serving the best interests of this country, and I think we really need to see what science, the real scientists out there, what they can do to regain trust with public health, which I think is going to be multiple generations before that is ever reestablished. But I think there's something to be said for trying to rebuild it in a way that serves us. And that's where I want Jay Bhattacharya should be the head of the CDC, NIH, the whole thing. I think he and his crew are brilliant people. Martin Koldorf, Sinetra Gupta, she's English, but these are the, Martin Koldorf was just fired from Harvard because he spoke up. I mean, these institutions are so corrupt that they now are doing this sort of PR campaign, like, grace, we need grace, and we need, truth and reconciliation. It's like, okay, you want to see a truth and reconciliation court? I have suggestions. I have no dissidents. Like Ji-Shang Ho, he's the dissident I interviewed he's a North Korean defector, went to South Korea. He's now a member of the parliament in South Korea. Amazing, pure-hearted man. Dragged himself 6,000 miles on one leg and a crutch to escape North Korea to get to South Korea. If we want a truth and reconciliation commission, I think individuals such as him outside of the American system should helm it and then review it. And we look at who is culpable for this. And I do think people should be prosecuted. And I do think people should go to jail. and this sort of we just have to have grace because we were tyrants. We might have been wrong. We might have been tyrannical, but we didn't know what we were doing at the time. You failed. Those people failed in their moments of character. Full on.
Their defense that they're trying to do publicly is, we had good intentions, and we know everybody, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and it's not about your intentions, it's about your results and what you did, not whether you thought you were doing good. If you did the opposite and you did bad and you killed people and you ruined lives, you don't get a pass for, but I didn't think I was doing that. I thought I was doing good. Going back to the Soviet Union, like you were talking about, and the dissidents, if you go back and study the Soviet Union, science under Stalin was similar, where they decided what the science was. The science was whatever the party and the Stalin said was the science. And psychiatry was, if you disagreed with the party and Stalin, you were mentally ill and you were put in a mental institution. That was science under the Soviet Union back then. So, they showed us how to do it the wrong way. And I guess some of our people have learned that lesson pretty well.
I think when the mafia approaches a local neighborhood in their territory and says, we need some money from you monthly because we want to protect you, they can make the argument that they were doing that with good intentions.
Yeah. And they donated some of that to the church.
Yeah, exactly. Talk is cheap. I mean, there's an old joke about Hollywood. You have to have wings to stay above the BS. And I mean, I think we were just realizing that science, the Institute of Science, Science Inc., the bureaucracy that has usurped the scientific method and all that it promised, are cowards hiding behind words in terms of, very highly designed propaganda to, because everything said was that's what I meant with the master obfuscator. It suggests, it does this. It's all these get out of jail free cards everywhere in it, because they're making tough decisions. And yet all those decisions led to them gaining more power, more money, and more prestige. And, in a situation like this, it's supposed to be we're supposed to be selflessly helping each other. I remember even post 9/11, where all of America, before we realized what had happened, the buildings went down. We thought there'd be a lot of casualties. Unfortunately, everyone was killed involved. There was very few living casualties, but there was a couple days where all of America was trying to donate blood and get to New York City and help out. And it was there was a shining moment there. And just like that moment, I felt that, like if there was a chance that this was a actual dangerous situation in the form of SARS-CoV-2, that we would come together and we would have a giant Manhattan Project of effort. Let's have all these scientists and doctors try different things and have it organized in such a way we can see what works. We start implementing it and actually participate in a giant experiment. There was no Manhattan Project. There was no leadership from Fauci of the science. Like they're like all these claims, like where were the meetings? Who was there? What were the minutes taken? What was the research given? They keep pointing to this like, oh, vague, oh, the science was ever changing. All those records exist. Release them. Why were those not put out? And then these things like I mean, we talked about fear. Just having a great time talking about this, but like remember on the news there was like daily death rate, daily infection rate.
Oh, yeah.
Where were those numbers coming from? There's no apparatus to track that at all in the system. I had asked at the time, and like they were, they're just there. Like those were just computer models.
How legit were most of those numbers, and why did they just disappear at a certain point?
Yeah, like ask all the journalists at the time, what's your source? What was the source of that? Who was creating it? Like every day there was like a little computer graphics guy who had to put it into the system, live TV, CNN, Fox, all of them. And then like that number came from somewhere, and that number kept changing, and that number was sourced from one of these government agencies. That government agency, there was someone administering it. There's paperwork. There was a source. There was the numbers. Where were they coming together? There is no universal hospital reporting of daily infections and deaths, and yet they were presented as fact. They were complete bullshit.
and just pause for a second. Think about what you just said. It's so true. We watched that, and it was complete bullshit.
Yeah. And you sit there, and if you're the type of people who's, I mean, because of my profession, I mean, I'm not saying I'm any special character. I just happen to have a profession where I got into the eyes open crowd and started interviewing people who decided to take on the weird space of tyranny, because it's designed to make you turn on yourself, question yourself, never speak out loud, never express. If you think something, don't say it. Like it's this very weird internal space that they're trying to control, and they want you to not talk. And then you see this stuff, and it's like wholesale BS. And you have friends, family, coworkers, all different sorts, all different ways of thinking, and more than half of them have bought into it and think it's absolutely, they're terrified for themselves. Their narcissistic sense of self-preservation has been activated. No, everybody wants to survive and live. I mean, but this is being used against them. And you're just sort of like, well, I'm pretty sure it's bullshit. I know that and I literally would say, like, I know it's going to take like 4 years before you guys will believe me. I mean, I'm sorry. It's like a Cassandra complex thing, but you're like, it's bullshit. And just to lean into that word a little bit. And these numbers, like, and now it's like, where did these numbers come from? I even was trying to, when I talked to all these people, like, ask that question, keep asking that question. Where did those numbers come from? And then where did these, and then you had Walensky, and you had Fauci, and you had Birx, and they're all getting up there with these charts and stuff. Give us the sources real time. Like, and they're like, oh, all our scientists on it. What scientists? What, where's the organization? Who's doing it? When you're getting a report from, like, I don't know, they had like from Sri Lanka and Venezuela, like this, so and such a group said this from Belize, and they're using that as science to dictate American policy. Like, who are these? Where are they coming from? And why are they even on the map? Where's the giant American effort of the American know-how, the giant scientific Manhattan Project to understand COVID and protect the vulnerable, and which is all Jay Bhattacharya and his ilk we're promoting. Let's protect the vulnerable, and I actually have footage. I mean, then you have like, Fauci said, well, that's just such nonsense. It was pure ego on his part, because he was trying to control it from his perspective, and anything outside of his control was wrong. And that, to me, smacks of the giant insecurity of the state that is true of all the authoritarian tyrannical regimes that preceded it.
And like you said, pure ego, and he's on an ego book tour right now, and you look at it going back. Here's a guy who was on fashion magazines.
Yeah.
Really, Mr. Fashion?
Oh yeah.
Fauci, come on now. So, if you couldn't, I mean, if you didn't have the humility to realize the last thing you should be on is a damn fashion magazine when you look like you do, come on now. But, everything about it was ego and narcissism on his part, and is. And like you said, but what's the good that's coming out of it? And part of it is what you created with Follow the Science. But it's that freedom movement that is getting people to question, to think.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the question in big pharma again, they used to question it, then they stopped. Now they need
Right.
to question it. And why do we have the most biggest medical industry and we have the sickest people?
Yeah.
Why does that not work? Why is it the opposite of what it should be? All those things. That freedom movement is starting to. I did a show with two young Puerto Rican sisters from New York who were Democrats who got involved in the freedom movement against the vaccine mandates and in their schools with their kids. And they're part of that freedom movement now because of that. So tell us little bit of that, because out of the negative sometimes comes really.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying, and I appreciate holding space for the rant. I mean, I've been I've kept a civil tongue and a diplomatic stance most of the time because I wanted to, and I still do. I mean, everything I'm saying, I'm actually being pretty diplomatic about, but it's
a lot further.
But there were a lot of scientists. There were a lot of people who would like identify as left of center, liberal, that kind of stuff, who were like, yeah, but this doesn't equate. They could see that there's corruption here. But my silver lining in all this was that, I'd been part of a group that had been trying to support freedom of speech as the fabric of this individualism that I think drives all of human creation and flourishing. And it occurred to me, per everything I learned with Witness Project, the spontaneous awakening of the individual when oppressed. That's what a dissident is, really. It's someone who wasn't looking to become a voice. They weren't seeking that type of notoriety or that type of lightning rod experience, but they themselves experience something and they have to speak up. They have to express themselves. They see a wrong and they have to describe it, and they can't be silenced. And what the global pandemic did, or the global lockdowns did, was subject the entire world's population simultaneously to this duress, a type of tyrannical duress. And it has awakened an entirely new crop of dissident individuals who couldn't go along to get along. They had to speak up. And I think it swelled the masses of like people who are like, oh, wow, what this thing called freedom, this thing called freedom of speech, this thing called expression is the cornerstone of literally everything we do, including the scientists. I mean, I think Jay Bhattacharya, he's a phenomenal scientist and of many stripes, but he's now becoming one of the leading freedom of expression voices. I mean, Molten Colder, everybody just talks about freedom of expression now. Like, my God, without it, we are nothing. And it's just, just like how no one expected how the lockdowns split every community down the middle in ways that no one expected. Like, it was just everything: church, work, family, everything. The people awakening all over the world to the corruption is unbelievable. And which part of what we want to do with Follow the Science is capture that, fan that flame of resistance, of self-thinking, of critical thinking, and do it in such a way that it made sense to young people. We have these incredible cartoons, animations, and a wry sense of humor in the show, so that that the teenagers and young kids who went through it, or who are going to grow up in the immediate hangover of it, will be able to understand what happened and see it as, it was a difficult time. A lot of unnecessary suffering happened, in the management of, there was, I could talk about the a little bit about like what I think actually happened in terms of, why people were dying of COVID at an inflated rate than I think that how, what the virus actually was. But not to get sidetracked by that. I think that that's a big conversation, but I do think people want to know, like, why was there so much unnecessary suffering in the form of lockdowns, and what did we learn from it? What's the wisdom gain? How do we not let tyrannical, bureaucratic, state adherents pull a fast one on the general population again? And I think this new generation of free thinkers and open thinkers and freedom of speech thinkers is going to help push that back in the future.
Well, we're definitely past the hour mark, and we could go on and we will have to do another show, and I want to be able to push this out. You'll Follow the Science, feel free, everybody, to go check out the website, donate. watch the first episode.
Yeah, and just to clarify, it's chapter one of the first. The first episode is 5 chapters, so it's the first 20 minutes. It's a very intense. It's like the first ad break. So it's a chapter one. We're releasing chapters 2 through 5 in later in the year, and that collectively is the episode. So we've released the first part. If you give a $20 donation, sort of a pre-ticket sale, and if you give that $20 donation, you can watch the rest of the show when it comes out. And I just want to say quickly, John Duffy, thanks for being part of the show and being a dancer in the show, as well as a wonderful line producer.
Well, it was an honor. I had a really great experience. I'm glad that I was given the opportunity to be part of it. I think it's something that will impact people. And so, for everybody who's watching the show, I hope you go there. I hope you watch it. I hope today's show with Howk inspired you to think, to question, to re-question. If you've given up the idea of questioning, maybe it's a chance to come back to that philosophy of question authority and question everything and be a free thinker. And I think this series will get you to do that. You may not agree with everything. You may agree with a lot of it or none of it, but don't be afraid. It ain't going to hurt you to watch and learn. Have a little courage. Be willing to watch ideas that don't always agree with you. Get outside your bubbles. Get outside your boxes, and challenge yourself to learn and listen and grow from other people with different standpoints. You don't know what it may do for you. It may change your life. So I encourage you to do that, to check out Follow the Sciences on his website and go do it. Any closing thoughts from you, Howk? And then I'm going to close out the show.
It's been absolutely fabulous to watch the wheels of history turn real time and to be able to do so with amazing individuals such as yourself and the associates that we met through Follow the Science and all the people have emerged. We really got to watch history happen. There were difficulties, but what an amazing time. And I'm glad that we all stepped up to deal with it.
100%. Thank you. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing and continuing to do with the series. And I look forward to being part of sharing it with the audience as we go forward. Thanks a lot, Howk. Thank you so much for being part of the show with me.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. I hope it really inspired you to think. I hope it inspired you to overcome maybe the fear of listening to opinions that you may not agree with. And if you do agree with it, that's cool too. Support it, donate, watch it, share it with your audience. I was, like I said, I was honored to be part of this and to continue to support what is being done to get people to take a look at this for not only today, but for the future. And if you haven't seen any of my previous 78 podcast shows, you can watch them on my Live Courageously YouTube channel, or you can also go to my Live Courageously website, and you can watch them there as well. So join me every Sunday on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and watch these amazing Live Courageously shows with my friends and my courageous guests who join us every Sunday. So my wish for you is that you find the courage and to live courageously. And until I see you next week, have a great day.